Welcome back to Pink Slip Pavilion, where every week we are sharing a layoff story that went from pink slip to power move. And this week we have Luana Mendoza-Evans and her story from corporate identity to finding her thread.
This pink slips the start, not the end.
Welcome to Pink Slip Pavilion, Luana. We're so excited to have you here and to hear your story.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashley. I'm so excited to share it with you.
Yeah, so we have to start with the very first question, which is the most important one. Have you
Yeah.
ever gotten a pink slip?
I have. February of 2025, layoffs had actually been rolling through the company for a few years, and I had watched it happen to people around me. But I had just come off the best years of my career, so the day that it landed on me, it was a complete shock. But what I didn't know sitting in that room was that the worst day of my career was about to become the best thing that ever happened to me. Because being an entrepreneur was not on my bingo card, not even close. And yet here I am, a year later, a Latina founder, building a business that I actually love on my own terms and even featured in Times Square. And
Amazing.
yes, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But to get from that conference room to here, I had to fall apart a little bit first. So I'll take you back to that day
Yeah,
today.
absolutely. Let's start with while you're getting your pink slip, where were you mentally? Because I think a lot of listeners are maybe fearful that day might be coming or maybe walking through that now. So, where were you in that moment? What was going on in life? How did you feel? And then we'll kind of talk about where you are now.
Yeah. Well, I had been working since I was 15 years old, and after college, I built my whole career in corporate, 17 years at that point. And the last stretch was a director and chief of staff at a Fortune 100. I was actually a single mom for about 14 of those years.
Oh.
And by the time that happened, as I mentioned, I had just come off the best couple of years of my career. I was standing up programs from scratch, the kind of work where people in other departments were reaching out to ask how they could replicate what I had built in their own areas. I was so genuinely good at what I did and I loved it. And at that point, I had only been married for about a year. And so from the outside, I had everything that I was supposed to want, a good title and a paycheck that made staying easy. And I'll say this openly because I am a huge advocate of therapy.
Mm.
I loved the work, but I had been telling my therapist for almost a year that the life around it just didn't feel like a good fit for me anymore. The pace, the time that it kept pulling me away from my family, I just hadn't found the courage to act on it. The money was good, the benefits were great, so I stayed. And also, this wasn't really the first time that I had lost my job, but it was the first time that I had a real choice about what came next. But I'll come back to that.
I mean, I think that's a huge point because you don't always have a choice of what comes next depending on what's going on in your life. You always have a choice, but there's different circumstances and different seasons of life. And I think that's such an important point of you had the privilege of being able to decide what's next for me. But I also love what you said about feeling like you had everything that kind of society tells you you're supposed to have, the title, you're making good money, the marriage, all the things, and yet something wasn't fitting. And I think often we stay in places where we don't feel like we're fitting because
Mm.
everyone else is applauding what we're doing and it
Yeah.
isn't. So you kind of question, should I take a leap? Should I do something else? So how did you what was your evolution of mindset to go from, okay, I'm losing my job to I think I'm going to become an entrepreneur or making the choice of what came next for you? What was that evolution for you?
Yeah. Well, first, let me take you back to that day because I have to explain and kind of set the tone for what happened that day because that really, set everything in motion, of course. And so It was a totally normal day. I had back-to-back meetings that morning on the other side of the building. So it's akin to an airport terminal. There's buildings A through H, and they all connect. So I worked in C, and I had a meeting in H. So I literally ran back to our area because I had a one-on-one with my boss. And when I get to my boss's desk, she wasn't there. And so our EA told me that she was in a conference room that I had never heard of before. So she said she'd walk me over. So when I walk in, my boss and her boss were inside. And I stop in the door thinking I was interrupting their meeting, but she told me to come in. So I sit down and I start pulling out my laptop thinking, we're gonna have our regular one-on-one. And she tells me, oh, no, you don't need your laptop. And that was the moment that I knew. So she told me that she had been with our team a couple of months and she had decided to eliminate my role. A position at the same level would be posted with a different title. She told me that it wasn't personal. And normally in a reorg like this, when there's other open roles, you'd be able to apply for them, but that
Yeah.
wasn't on the table here. So there was no warning, no HR in the room, and I had 60 days. Then my boss slid a box of Kleenex across the table, and the tears just came right there in the room.
Oh,
I know, because going from part of a team to being told to go home, you're not part of it anymore, it's a real loss and it hurt. I love that job and I was so good at it, but underneath the hurt, something kept me grounded. She said it wasn't personal, and the strange thing is, I believed her because at that point, I had already done a lot of work on myself. And I had made peace with the fact that in corporate, a company is a team, it's not a family. And the Netflix founder, Reed Hastings, he wrote a book, and I always remember, I think it's called No Rules Rules. And in it, he says, on a team, you can be one of the best players on the roster and still get traded. It's
mhm.
not personal, it's just a business call. So even crying in that room, I knew that it was never about my performance. I knew my value, and I never once questioned my worth. But then I got in the car and I really lost it. I tried to call my parents and they didn't pick up. So I just drove around and I cried. And then eventually I drove to their house, and of course, my mom opens the fridge and she pulls out a margarita.
Yeah, mom.
Yes, it's called a cheese spot. If you know, you know. And she hands it to me, and I'll never forget. They were not worried about me even a little bit. And my mom, she just looks at me and she said that maybe it was time that I did my own thing. I thought she was out of her mind. That sounded like so much work. Um, and in those first few days, the only version of this that I could tell anyone was that polished one, that I had been impacted by a leadership restructuring, that I was grateful, that I was excited for what was next. And every word of that was true, but it just wasn't the whole truth.
Yeah.
That's the version that you give the world when you're still in shock, before you've let yourself actually feel any of it.
Yeah. I feel like I don't love that that's how we address layoffs though, if I'm completely honest. I feel like there's a way to be grateful and to look in the moment, reflect back on all of the great things that you've taken from the experience while still being honest about kind of what's going on. I think we kind of put on these faces sometimes in corporate that I'm not really sure who told us we need to, but we kind of keep the status quo with that. And I hope that more people listening to these stories, listening to this podcast will take hope out of this, but also will take there's nothing wrong with being honest about where you're at in a way that's still constructive to where you're going.
Exactly. Yes. And So you also asked, how that evolved. And I also like sharing about what those 60 days look like because in those 60 days, it's a roller coaster.
Mhm.
Nobody warns you about what that limbo is going to feel like. And I was sent home that same day and I never went back to the office. They still had me writing SOPs for my own role, and they wanted me to meet with the 5 people that my work was getting distributed to. Um, and I'll be honest, I did tell my boss that they were welcome to bring their questions to her. Underneath all of it, though, the real stuff was happening. I was in therapy every single week and journaling things that I had been avoiding for years. I
Mm.
was reading severance paperwork in between giving our new puppy Mabel a bath because we had just brought her home and she had zero regard for my existential crisis. And I didn't expect what came next. I figured I would just relax for the summer. I had been working since I was 15, so I told myself that I earned the break. I even had 2 trips already on the calendar, a big Disney trip with our family and our extended family, and our very first couples trip for our wedding anniversary. And so between that severance and that travel, I had something that I never really had given myself before, space.
Mm.
And in that space, instead of just resting, I got introspective and I started asking myself what my next chapter could actually look like. And that's when it hit me that, this wasn't the first time that life had knocked me down. I had been a single mom for 14 years. And the very first time that I lost a job, I was pregnant and single. No
Mm.
severance, no safety net, just fear and a baby on the way. And I had survived that. When I lost my job that time, I never lost my confidence that I was going to be an amazing mom and have a successful career. So, sitting here with a partner beside me and my mom handing me that margarita and telling me to bet on myself, I realized that I was getting a second chance at that same crossroads, but this time I had everything that I needed to choose differently. And somewhere in there, I made peace with something. You can grieve a job even when you didn't want it anymore.
Absolutely.
Both of those things can definitely be true at the same time. And so, if you ever feel silly for grieving a job, don't. It's one of the hardest things that a person goes through.
Absolutely. It is grief. It is I I think one of the things that I thought of as you were explaining that is it's kind of the in between, like grieving a job that you don't want anymore is kind of like grieving your old self. You know that you don't want to be that person anymore, but that doesn't mean you don't love that person. It's just you're stepping into a new arena and there's a lot of fear often associated with the unknown. And so you're kind of in this in between of I'm grieving what I don't want anymore and trying to create the space for what I do want. But that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to go through the stages of loss and feeling it in your body. And I love that you were in therapy the whole time because I think a lot more people need therapy. It's a great resource for people to understand their own emotions. And when you go through these big life shakeups, I think it's such a powerful tool to just be able to understand how can I grieve something I don't want anymore while also being excited about what's next. How can those two things coexist within my space? I think it's important for us to learn that.
Absolutely, definitely.
So let's talk blessings because I feel like that's a good segue into what would you have missed out on? What blessings would you have missed out on had you not gotten that pink slip?
So many. Some of them small, like cafecitos with a friend on a Wednesday morning, or picking up my son from school without a knot in my stomach. But the brightest blessing isn't really about me at all. It's the work, the people that I get to work with. They're brilliant at their craft. They've had big, accomplished corporate careers, but they come to me with all these scattered pieces, a dozen ways that they could describe themselves, and no single clear story that ties it all together. And so, what they need isn't more ideas, they need one cohesive story. And that's what I do through Thread Studio. I work with corporate escapees like myself, and founders, the ones who left corporate or maybe got pushed out like I did. And I help them pull the one thread that runs through everything and build a brand around it. And what gets me every single time is the moment that they see themselves reflected back and regain their confidence. And all of a sudden, those scattered pieces line up to something clear, and they go, oh, wow, that's me. They don't have to become anyone new. It was there the entire time. It just wasn't legible yet. And watching somebody go from a pile of impressive but disconnected dust to seeing themselves reflected back and standing fully in one clear story and sounding confident, there's just nothing that I love more. And when somebody finally feels confident in their story and they go launch the business that they were scared to start, the ones that makes people's lives a little bit better. So I'm not just helping one person feel sure of themselves, but I get to have a real impact in my community and helping good people put good work out in the world. And that's one of the biggest blessings that I would have missed out if I stayed comfortable. I never would have known that this is what I was built to do.
Huge. I think a lot of entrepreneurs will relate to, I never would have started had I not been pushed. And I can definitely relate to that. So I know listeners listening to this will definitely identify with that. I've met a lot of corporate escapees that never would have taken the leap. So if you could talk to yourself with the wisdom that you have now, you could go back in time and you're in that office and you could tell yourself one or two things in that moment, what would you want that version of you to know?
Oh, goodness. Um, I would go back and knock on the window of that car and sit down next to her while she's crying and tell her, it was never about your performance. You gave that job everything. So let that part go. And the grief that you're feeling, that's allowed. Feel it. Don't rush past it to get to the grateful lesson learned version, because the only way to get to the other side of it is straight through it.
Yeah.
And your mom is right. Even though it sounds like too much work right now, you don't have to reinvent yourself to get out of this. The thread that makes you you is already there. You just have to pull it.
Amazing. And a margarita is waiting for you. So get driving.
Exactly.
So, wrapping up here, if there's someone who's going through a layoff, if there's someone who's scared that maybe there's one coming because the world is very unpredictable, or maybe they've gone through this in the past but are still harboring some of the emotion that comes with it, that grief, what would you want them to know and leave this conversation with?
If you're in the middle of this right now, here's what I would want you to hear it kind of more or less in the order that I had to learn it. So first, let yourself grieve. Don't rush to be okay, because losing a job, even one that you had outgrown, is a real loss. And the people that heal fastest are the ones who let themselves feel it first instead of pretending that they're fine. So feel it. That's not weakness. That's the first step. And then know that you're not alone. Even though it feels like you are, there's a whole community of people walking through this exact thing right now. And the moment that you find them, it gets lighter. So reach out for them. And if it helps at all, let my story be proof. I was sitting in my car crying, certain that it was the end of something, but it turned out to be the beginning of the best work of my life. So if you can't believe in yourself yet, borrow my belief in you until yours comes back. And then when you're ready, rebuild on purpose. Don't just grab the next job that looks like the last one. Use this chance to really get intentional. There's a Japanese concept that I leaned on called ikigai, and it means your reason for being. You find it where four things overlap: what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can actually be paid for. So sit in those questions and also go talk to people who are already doing work that makes you curious, just to hear how they got there. That's how that next chapter starts to take shape. Because here's what I know for sure, you don't have to become somebody new to come out of this. The thread that makes you you, it's already there. You just get to finally pull it. And the version of you on the other side of this will be more sure of yourself than the one that walked in. And I'll leave you with one last thing. The first time that I lost my job, it nearly broke me. But the second time, it freed me. Same event, completely different woman. And the only thing that changed was that I finally knew my own story well enough to bet on it.
So powerful and fantastic advice. So if you're listening to this, put that on repeat if you need a little advice in your journey. And Luana, thank you so much for joining me in the pavilion, for being willing to be vulnerable, share your story. I know that it will impact people out there.
Thank you so much for having me.
Another Pink Slip to Power Move story on the books. And if you don't believe in yourself yet and believe that you can grow through your layoff experience, please make sure you hit follow or subscribe. This channel, this podcast is designed to help build your belief that a layoff is not the end of the road. It is simply just the beginning. And all of these stories are meant to prove it to you. So if you're inspired by Luana, you want to connect with her, please check out the description of this episode. Her contact information will be there. I highly encourage you to connect. And of course, we're back next Wednesday and every Wednesday because we're on a mission to build your belief. So I'll see you next week.
This